Welcome to Off Watch, a podcast by the Ocean Race. This week is the chance to talk to those behind the victories, not the sailors, not the skippers, the people that we know so well, but somebody who's designing the boats that they go and win on. Juan K, or Juan Kouyoumdjian, is a big name in yacht design, having some of the most incredible sailboats penned by his very hand. He went to the same university as me, and it was a bit of a pleasure to ask him whether the rumours that I'd heard studying all that time on yacht design were true, plus what he thinks about the Imoca 60 and the move to one design for the ocean race. Sailing is an equipment sport, and while most victories can rest on the shoulders of the sailors themselves, an awful lot comes down to the design of their yacht. Now, in 2005, the ocean race moved from a 60-foot ballasted boat to a canting keel high-performance VO70. An Argentinian, Juan Kouyoumdjian, was asked to design a boat that could stand up to the rigours of round-the-world sailing. And he went a little bit better than most were predicting. ABN AMRO 1 was victorious in the 2005-06 edition of the race, winning with 3 out of the 9 legs remaining. Juan, thank you very much for joining me. Your designs, and we're not just talking about the ocean race, the America's Cup, the Imoca, the Admiral's Cup, all the designs that you've done, you're known for pushing the normal and standing out from the crowd. I'm wondering, is that the natural end of your design process, or do you strive to come up with a different design?
It's a very good question. I think that 20 years ago I would have given you a different answer than today. But I think this is part of the passion within me and the people around me to turn every stone. Just to look at every bit of performance that we can, and so I suppose that it just comes naturally that all the design process that we put together is related to that. Is related to work in a way that allows a system or a method to turn every stone and to try to the best of our abilities to take as much performance out of the design as possible. And this is why sometimes we're even very frustrated, because very quickly, as soon as you're putting the boat in the water, the boat hasn't sailed yet, and you're already thinking that you should have done it differently. But yeah, that happens. I mean, I think it has happened to every single boat that I've done so far. At the moment, that moment when you launch the boat, when the bulb touches or the hull touches the water, you're going, oof, I could have changed that,
Do you get much opportunity to do that? Where does your involvement in these boats finish? As a designer, you say, there's the lines plan, that can go to the builder, or do you always get on board and keep tinkering away?
No, it's a very good question. It has been everything. It depends on the projects, but it has to be said that if there is one characteristic of those that have done well, those have won races, have a few things in common, and one of them is the complete sort of dedication and involvement throughout the process. And racing boats, particularly the more complicated they are, usually there's a huge amount of performance which is left on the table by the once you stop designing and then you go into production, and certainly when you go sailing. So being able to develop the boats properly requires a very good symbiosis with the crew and with the people on the team, and that's another very interesting characteristic we can speak about. But there's a lot of performance to be gained. In the racing, the level of racing nowadays has gone to such a level that you can't just win it on a drawing board per se.
And how do you find that? Because it's interesting you mentioned the crew. That was something I wanted to discuss with you, because from where I am looking at the teams, more and more you see the sailors with a aeronautics background or a degree in engineering, something that might enable them to communicate with yourself or the design team and actually feed back that information. Do you ever get into those situations where you have to sort of, you can't talk my language? And I'm guessing when they can talk your language, it's easy.
I certainly can confirm that when they can talk your language, it's a lot easier. And this works both ways, by the way, that the designer needs to understand something about sailing. It's not only in one direction. But I would say that lack of being able to speak the same languages or to find a medium of communication is almost a recipe for disaster. I think at the level that we're talking about, nobody would ever get to the pinnacle, if you will, if both ends don't sort of merge in together. Without this merge, I don't believe anymore it's possible to have like a designer coming out with a design that is given to a bunch of guys that never met, and then those bunch of guys would just go and win a race. The designer cannot be good enough to do that, nor the sailors can be good enough to do that. You have to symbiosis, and that is the recipe of a winning program, and that touches very interesting aspects, which are the human aspects, the way you relate. And you see this throughout our sport, but also in other sports, like when you, like in the Volvo Ocean Race, America's Cup, let's just do the example of our industry or world, which is, let's say, the Volvo, the Ocean Race and the America's Cup. Every team, you would say that every team, if not most of the teams competing, are good enough, the sailors are good enough, and the engineers and the designers are good enough to win the race. But there's only one winner at the end. So what is that person what is that team have in common? Usually is that they manage to sort out their human aspect, the human side, and they manage to go beyond individual knowledges, intelligences, and experiences. Look at Formula One, would you say that the Ferrari engineers or the McLaren engineers are bad engineers, that they are silly, or the Red Bull guys are stupid compared to Mercedes? No, they're all really clever guys. But one team makes a difference. And that difference, usually you find it in the little intrinsicalities and the little things that make people work together properly. And that's what is happening at the top of our sport. You need to give room for that to gel, to merge, and to work together. Individual knowledges and intelligence are not good enough anymore.
So where did like you say, sailors got to be able to talk the design language, designers got to be able to talk the sailors' language. I know that you did a lot of sailing. I'm wondering, were you someone who decided to walk down the design route, go to the United Kingdom, get a degree in design? Did you decide to do that because it was a good way to continue sailing? Or was it that you were just so interested in the physics and the numbers and sailing was a good fit?
Yeah, it was a bit of both, I think. I think it was just continuing with a passion that's been with me throughout I knew I was going to do this when I was 5 or 6, so it's not like I ever had a doubt or anything. Sometimes I meet and cross people who tell me, well, you don't realize how lucky you are to have been so clear and sort of have done whatever you wanted throughout your life. And you don't really realize how lucky that is until you see other people not necessarily having gone through the same path or, struggling, not necessarily doing bad their job, but just not really enjoying it. And that just puts the contrast. But I think that that passion is very important. I don't understand how at this level you could design a very good boat, a very fast boat, if you're not able to understand the sailing side of it. And the same way we were talking earlier, I don't understand how a good sailor can actually get to that level if he doesn't really understand the other side. There is ABN AMRO. You were mentioning ABN AMRO. That was exactly what happened. It was a new class. It was a brand new sheet of paper. I was young. They gave me like here's a do it. Here's a bunch of money for you to go have fun. It wasn't like that, but kind of. And so it could have ended up in a disaster. Why didn't it end up in a disaster? Well, because there were also other people there, particularly the crew and Mike Sanderson and Brad and Brad Jackson and Tony Matter. And I mean, I don't want to forget anybody, but people that I was able to talk to, and often they would say, "No, man, you're mad. Stop smoking whatever you're smoking. Let's come back to planet Earth." But at the same time, I was also pushing them to think a bit differently, and you know what I mean. We were sort of pushing each other, and so when there is enough experience and enough talent on both sides, then the whole thing gels into a higher level, which is the key of success, I think.
Right. I want to get into ABN AMRO 1, but I want to go somewhere else just before I do, and this is just a complete personal indulgence. So you went, if I've got this right, you went to Southampton Institute and you studied yacht and powercraft design. Okay. Now, I went to Southampton Institute and I studied yacht and powercraft design, and your name back then, and we're talking 2001 to 2005, your name then was a little bit legendary in the corridors. And there was all sorts of rumours, and I really mean this is absolutely true. There's all sorts of rumours about you only did the first year and then you quit because you were teaching the lecturers and I know everything, I'm going to leave. My time being at university and studying, sailing basically, was that any day there was a nice breeze or there was nice sun, there were only 2 people in the lecture, everybody else was out sailing. With that kind of environment, with so many people, as you say, so passionate about the sport, what was your attendance like? Were you mostly learning on the water or in the classroom?
Well, I was trying to learn from both, and I did learn from both. But it's true that, I don't know if it happened with you, but at my time, they would reduce the grades or the marks with attendance. They would correct and my corrections were pretty, let's say, dropped down quite a bit from my low level of attendance. So that was a struggle because, anyway, I mean, I don't know what kind of myths or whatever you have heard, but my level of attendance was not good. I have to confess that.
No, that's great. That makes me feel a lot better about mine. The reason that I wanted to bring that up was because, so ABN AMRO, 2005, this is the VO70s. And there was, at that time, so much buzz about these boats. And for me, at the last little bit of university, and everyone was talking about what they might be like, and then the boats start coming out. And we've got these huge step changes with very hard chines. You know that these boats are going to be planing most of the time. You know that there's going to be so much performance. How exciting was it for you to be working on a boat that you knew wasn't just going to be better than the 60s, it was going to be something so far beyond?
Well, it was, of course, like a kid in a candy store for me. But I have to say that the levels of comfort that I went through, miscomforts as well, but I was very comfortable because I was given the means to study things properly. And this is where Roy Heiner was very, very good because, I mean, at that time I knew him and I met him sailing starboats and, so from more the sailing scene. At the time I was working with Oracle, BMW Oracle on the America's Cup. So, I was already playing with pretty cool tools, but I haven't been given the the big project yet, and he did. And I remember we had a meeting at the top end of the ABN AMRO sort of board meeting at the top of the building in Amsterdam, where the whole board of the I don't know, there were like probably 15 people there or something. And so after they finished their meeting, I sort of walked in, and we were waiting down in the lobby with Roy. So I walked in, and as soon as I walked in to sort of be introduced to these guys, the chairman basically says, all right, well, so why should we choose you? Why, like he threw me, and why are we going to win this race with you? And, I was fairly prepared. I said, look, this is my approach, this is my method, this is the way I would like to attack this new problem. Because at the time, the Volvo 70s were a brand new thing, counting kills and all that, for the race. And so I gave him a description of how I wanted to do this, and the technologies that we have been developing, particularly in the America's Cup, that I wanted to take to the Volvo Ocean Race, and how technological I wanted the thing to be. And it was a very quick deal. Immediately or very quickly, within a few minutes, they understood that the approach, at least I was proposing, was a very, let's say, analytical, science-based approach. And so they said, off you go, go and win this race. And so to answer your question, I was very comfortable because I was given the means to be comfortable, if you know what I mean. And but that is very important because I can imagine, not only because it was a first project, big project for me, but I can imagine even with somebody of experience. I'm fairly experienced now, and even facing same situations. Not given the means to do it properly, even now with all the experience that I have or other people have, you certainly can feel daunted by the problem, because in our world of yachting, we are quite crazy. I mean, when you look at what we do, no, but this is actually quite interesting, because when you look at what we do from an aeronautical point of view, aerospace point of view, we're completely mad. You go to any aeronautical guy and you say, yeah, I'm gonna do this thing that's gonna go around the world, with all these load cases, which are, pretty high load cases, with some people on board, and this is gonna be like a fuselage in steroids. And by the way, we don't have time to do much testing at all. We're just gonna build this thing, and the first thing that comes out to the yard, which is gonna launch it. And a few months later, when these guys go around the world, they think you're mad. If you go with a problem to any aerospace or aeronautical environment, they would want 3 or 4 times the budget and probably twice the time to accomplish the same thing. But yet we are what we are, and we are who we are, and we find ourselves doing these extraordinary things in record times and with very big constraints, sometimes even budgetary constraints. Which only makes sense because of the passion that is behind it, the passion of everybody involved. Otherwise, why would you? You'd be mad. Sometimes you don't even make money out of it. So there's absolutely no reason why you would do it. But yet we do it, and it's almost like a masochistic thing. That give me the next project. I'm really looking forward to the next round of the world race, and so there's something about it. I'm probably very biased in my point of view, but there's something about it that makes us, not only us or me, designers, it's the sailors as well, that really wanting to do it again, and next time you would push it to another level, and you don't want to make the same mistakes that you made last time, and you keep sort of polishing your game. But if you look at it from a pure engineering point of view, which is how the aeronautical industry, aerospace industry will look at it, we're just completely mad.
Just have to give me 1 second. I've just got to take my jumper off. I am so hot. I've underestimated how warm it will be when I get my studio lights on. So it's interesting hearing you talk about that in a way that I remember looking at the design of boats, and you have to design a boat very close to the limit. Like you say, you don't really get a chance to test, and you really have to get it right on the money. Whereas if you're designing a building or if you're designing a bridge, you can put in these huge factor of safeties. Did you, does that weigh on you? The real life aspect that you are making something which has got to take people through an area which is very dangerous.
It's terrible. Back in the day, particularly that first race with Avi Nambro, it was daunting. I just couldn't sleep whenever they were out there, and I knew they were not in friendly weather. I just couldn't sleep. I remember the first night. Actually, the first night after the start, they had a pretty bad that night. Actually, a few boats had to come back, and Pirates of the Caribbean had to be flown to Cape Town. That was a pretty bad night. They had a fire. Avi Nambro had a fire on board, which they had never had a fire, an electrical fire. I mean, it's this the ocean race is the perfect scenario for Murphy's law to apply in its fullest form, and it does. As soon as you give it a chance, it will. And like in the Southern Ocean, we had a little bit of a structural issue. It wasn't a major one, but visually it was a major. That one of the forward longitudinals in the bow was sort of detached from the hull, which we have never seen in months of sailing. And I remember I had Dave Indian, that was a really good crew and very good with composites and all that. He was on the satellite phone trying to describe to me the problem. I was saying to him, well, is it moving? And he said to me, well, it depends on where on the wave are you? I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, right now it's not, but a few seconds later, depending, because they were jumping these waves, this thing was separating from the bottom of the hull. And so we came out with a plan to fix it, and it was okay. Then they kept on going to Australia. But you find yourself in the Southern Ocean with I don't know how many miles each side of the boat and a piece of structure which is moving, and it's obviously not nice for them. But it's also not nice for me or whoever is involved when you are in the safety of your house. But so no, to answer your question is very, very hard, and it's the ugliest part of what I do, but nonetheless it's part of the job, I suppose.
Because you mentioned Pirates of the Caribbean, and if memory serves, Movistar also had, I think, keel problems. Ericsson, I think, was they dismasted on leg 2? I think there was a whole bunch, and I'm wondering if you're watching ABN AMRO 1. Obviously, it's performing well on the water. You're getting the speeds out of it. As the race tick on and you see more and more of the boats having structural or design issues, do you start to feel more confident? Oh, well, we've made it 50% of the way round, 75%? Or do you think, it's going to be our turn next?
No, but if you have the means to do a job properly, both hydro aerodynamically and structurally, your level of confidence and safety is high, and even if you have an issue, you have enough information, enough intelligence to quickly address it and understand it. You're not in the blind, So that is very important. But the problems are daunting nonetheless, and they need to be taken care. There's lives at stake. I mean, look at, you were mentioning that first race, but at the end of the race, the leg between America and Portsmouth, where actually ABN won the race, and the arrival in Portsmouth was the leg where Hans fell overboard. So it's incredibly sweet and sour, if you will. I remember I was in the Solent in the Zodiac in a dinghy, waiting for ABN AMRO to arrive. It was like midnight. It was really late, and so they were winning the leg and therefore winning the race in Portsmouth, and sort of follow them with throughout all the Solent, from Leamington all the way to Portsmouth, follow them with a rib in order to be with them, and it was an incredible joy for them, but for me as well. But a day behind, there was a completely different story, and then the other ABN AMRO boat was coming with the crew of Telefonica on board and Hans's body. It's terrible. But that's what this race is about. It pushes the emotions and the feelings to such levels that I think it's difficult to explain. It's funny because before I started doing this round the world race, through the America's Cup, particularly with John Kostecki and other people that have done it, they mentioned it. Said, such highs and such lows, but then you only remember the highs, and you hear all these things, but you don't really understand what they mean until you go through it. And And this is why it's such an extraordinary race. It's just that it pushes the human element in every human element to the limit.
Well, for you, obviously, with ABN AMRO 1, obviously at the time, the victory, as you described, a bit muted, but it was an incredible accomplishment. What you'd done, you had ABN AMRO 1, you had ABN AMRO 2, which, if I've got this right, ABN AMRO 2 was sort of the first iteration of a design, and then ABN AMRO 1 was something that you could tweak. But then for the next two editions, you're spread across multiple campaigns. So in the next one, you've got Ericsson 4, you've got...
Ericsson 3. That one
what was that like in terms of, I've now got to look after, a few different boats, a few different crews?
Well, the following one we did with Ericsson, we only did it with Ericsson, and it was a very, very good campaign. It was very well managed. We had some rule issues, which we sort of had to deal with, but, let's just leave that in the past. But it was a very good campaign. But it was a campaign where I was and my team, we were fully dedicated to the project. So it was very good, very good crew as well. But then the following one, the last one we did was with Groupama. We did Groupama, Telefonica, and Puma.
Yeah,
and that was very, very hard. And I personally, if I had the choice not to do it that way, I would. But we were kind of forced by the organization to do it that way, because having won the prior two, I mean, I don't know if we can speak about this, but
we can do it.
So basically, what they were facing is that there were potential entries that would only enter if we designed the boat, and so they were conditioning the entry to our design. And so because we were going to work in an exclusive basis again, because that's how I felt more comfortable, for the organization, it was very daunting to have all this pressure and potentially not having entries simply because we couldn't design their boats. So the pressure started during the race. And at the prize giving in St. Petersburg, I remember it was 2010 or whenever it was.
Ericsson 809.
809. Okay, so there, by the time we got to the prize giving, it was obvious that we were under a lot of pressure to change, and to the point that they basically said to us, if you don't change it, we just put it in the rules. So they basically said, do it, because otherwise we'll force you to do it. And so that's when we had a bit of a brainstorm in the office, because we didn't really know what it meant, and so we structured ourselves. We basically acknowledged ourselves that we weren't structured within the office to do different projects. So we went through a very, very big internal brainstorm and questioning about our structure to do it. And so what we did is, we divided the office into the three teams that we were going to work with. And we then divided in what was the R&D and the actual structure and executive work for every team. And I didn't want to go into a sort of design phases where the one that paid more had the best. I really didn't want to do that. So what I proposed to the three teams is that I was going to take care of the R&D program with a team of really clever guys, and I was just going to go for it. I said, this is my program, which is more or less tailored to what we believe is the good times for building the boats. So I'm going to go for it, and then you guys tell me when you want to build your boats, and at the time you want to build your boat, we'll give you the best we know at that time. Of course, then it becomes complex, because it's the best for what, and then some people wanted some trends more towards a reaching boat. Some others said, well, yeah, but I don't want to neglect the upwind performance. So then you need to tailor it a little bit. But
is that I'm wondering, does that make it easier for you? Because you almost don't want to produce three identical boats. So the fact that the client is saying, I want something a little different, I'm imagining might be a bit of a relief.
Yeah, well, it's a relief, but also it's a good way of working, because the way I do it is I put a lot of intelligence, if you will, on the table, and some simulations, and we did a lot of routings for each different leg and all that. But then and then with that follows a series of recommendations. But the way we managed that is I sort of was putting the teams on the spot in a way. But all these teams, I mean, one was very much managed by Frank Hamas. The other one was Kenny Reed with Tony Matter and Brad Jackson. The other one was Iker with Xavi Fernandez. I mean, these guys, they know exactly what they want. You know, it's not like they listen to you, and maybe you manage to shift a little bit what they want, but they know exactly what they want. So that makes it very easy. But nonetheless, what I didn't want is them to be missing a development slot. You know, so by the end of the time, when the time came to build the boats, the discussion was, well, if we wait 1 more month or 2 more months, what is it that we're going to be researching in this? And in that way, tailor it. But I didn't want to basically say, oh, this is the uplink package and this is the reaching package. I just kind of work that. But then, so that was on the R&D side. And then each team had a group of 3 or 4 engineers and draftsmen, which they developed their own deck layouts, their own interiors, and their own daggerboard systems. And so everything was multiplied by 3 or 4, and so I think we managed it. Okay. It was really, really a lot of work. But what I generally didn't like about that approach, it is understandable, but what I didn't like is I was not belonging to any of the 3 teams, because each team was kind of, fearful that because I was the only one that was very much involved in the 3 projects, they were fearful that through me there was some sort of leakage. And they were very much relieved in the way we dealt with the servers and software and the codes on it. Every drawing had a different code, and so I think that there's a certain extent that they were trustful. But these guys are competing at the very high level. So I became the unwanted friend kind of thing, and that really bugged me quite a bit. I mean, of course, after the race, we have great relationships with all of them, even though only one won.
Like you say, you were successful again. All 3 of those boats were quick. One of them very quick, Groupama 4. So now we have 3 editions of the Ocean Race with the VO70s, and your boat was at the top of the podium on every single one. Even in the editions, even if you take out the fact that your boats won, your boats were winning all the legs pretty much. I mean, sort of 80% of the legs were won by, one yacht design boats. So then let's go to the 65. How was that moment when you were really making a name for yourself? You were, as you say, you were the guy, to the point where the organisers were forcing you to work with multiple teams. And then the announcement is, we're going to go to a 1 design boat, and we're going to, for good reasons on their own, remove the design element. What was that like for you?
Well, it was a disappointment for sure, because I could understand the reasons why they did it. I didn't share them. I mean, my position was that I didn't want to do 1 design. I don't think the highest level of our sport should be 1 design. I mean, I think that there are areas in our sport which are okay to be 1 design. There are plenty of more amateur related sailing where it should be 1 design. But at the pinnacle of our sport, and there are 3 pinnacles in our sport, which is the offshore, the America's Cup, and the Olympics. And at the pinnacle of our sport, it should not be 1 design, because sailor, what defines a sailor is its capacity. I mean, sailing is an equipment-based sport. You cannot go sailing without a piece of equipment. So the symbiosis and the relationship between a sailor and its equipment is fundamentally is part of who we are as sailors. We cannot remove that. And this wish to remove it on the notion of one design makes no sense to me. Particularly that it's not true that it ends up costing less and all that. I mean, there are arguments for some savings, but not in the essence of the one design. In fact, if you look at the Olympic classes, which are one design, the budgets are spent equally, if no more. It's just that they spend it on little millimetric things that make almost no difference. But anyway, going back to your question. So it was a disappointment because I fundamentally don't believe that one of the three pinnacles of our sport should be one design. But I was understanding that there was a crisis, and there were the vision was that it was a struggle to get to a lot of teams and so forth. And also particularly is that there was a timing issue. With the Volvo Ocean Race, the most precious thing is time. And there's always been teams which are interested enough and financed enough to eventually do the race, but too late, And so I think that from that point of view, the vision of the organizers to basically have a solution for a late entry to be competitive is smart, is clever, but it kills the essence. But so when I was faced with that problem, when Knut Froster came to see me in Valencia with that problem, I basically said that I was against the one design, that I wasn't going to do a one design. But I suggested that we do a freeze design, a frozen design. I basically said, let's but at that time we had, all this, the Puma, the Ericsson, the Groupama and the Telefonica designs, which are the three latest, plus the previous ones. And I said, okay, let's freeze them. So if you want to reduce the R&D cost and all that, let's just say that you pick all designers put designs on the table. And Marcelino would put his design, and everybody else would put their design. And then so we don't charge for R&D. There will be some minimum work to be done. And each team will pick whichever package they want. So we would eliminate. We don't do it one design, but we would eliminate a lot of the R&D cost. And then if the economy comes back and it's so good, then next time we come crazy again. Yeah. But he didn't. I think he considered it. I mean, that's a question you should ask him. I think he actually considered it, but he didn't accepted it. He didn't go for it.
Well, the 65s, for better or worse, came in. They've made an impression and they're here for another edition. But this brings us on to the IMOCAs. So if you are an avid fan of the Ocean Race or of the Volvo Ocean Race, the IMOCAs will be potentially a little bit new, but they're not new boats and they've been going through an awful lot of design iterations. So I want to ask you about that. But before I do, we need to talk about the foils. And I want to ask you about something that I found in an interview of yours. I think it was back in 2018. No, longer, 2016, I think it was. And you were talking about the America's Cup. And one of the things that people always say to justify the vast sums of money that go into the America's Cup is something will be designed and it will make its way down the sport and then everyone can enjoy it. But you were giving the impression that you didn't think that foiling was going to come down. It wasn't really the right step for the America's Cup. And apologies if I've got that wrong. But I'm wondering now, what is your opinion of foiling technology? What we see in the America's Cup is one thing, but we're starting to see a lot of work for boats that are using foils. Maybe not to fly, but more and more.
I mean, it depends how you measure the trickle down. I remain of the opinion that it hasn't trickled down and it won't. And simply because the normal sailing, and by normal, I mean the images that you see with the flying moths or the America's Cup or even the IMOCAs, that's not normal. That's a different world. So, but if we're talking about the people that sail with the passion of sailing, and they do that regularly, call it every weekend, and they enjoy their way of sailing, they do that within an environment that just foiling is not. It's not part of that environment. I would even argue that they will not enjoy it. Even if they would be able to put a very heavy boat on foils, which by the time that you foil such a heavy boat, you would not necessarily be quicker. but anyway, so it is amazing. Foiling is, but you made a very interesting distinction, which is the difference between flying and foiling. So I was referring to flying per se, and the notion of basically flying above the water. That is something that is a very specific niche that even with very sophisticated flying software and autopilots, it would be accessible to whoever that wants to go that way. But in order to be efficient, it conditions your vessel to be of not heavier than a certain weight and specific. So, you can't go cruising in a fairly decent budget and do it flying. That's just not going to happen. All right. So, but it does open the door to a lot of sailing, which can be done flying. From a dinghy to anything, to a very light multi-hull, if you will, which might satisfy a series of people that they want to go through that experience. It's just that, in my view, the quantity of those people is very small. There are not many. I mean, there are some, and great. I would be one, but in the big scheme of things, there are many. So. We should definitely approach flying with the enthusiasm and respect that it deserves, but we should be very careful to not fall in the trap that if you're not flying, you're not sailing anymore. There is room for everybody and for everything, and those two types of sailing. Sort of can complement each other, and there's always a little bit of trickle down that happens here or there, but it's very limited. And those that think that because racing boats have been flying for the last, they've been flying for a long time, but you know what happens in San Francisco in the last 10 years or so, there's been a bit of a buzz on it. Those that think that buzz will basically transform and go down into their 20-ton cruising boat, and they will be sort of, go around the bay flying, sipping gin and tonics. It's not going to happen.
So then let's talk about not flying, but foiling. So now we're at the IMOCAs. This is what we're going to see in the next edition of the Ocean Race. What are we likely as fans? We've seen the 65s for the last two editions. We know what they've delivered. Unbelievably close racing, boats that have been so nervous about splitting more than half a mile. It's just nip and tuck. When we watch the next edition of the race with these foil assisting IMOCAs, what's the racing going to be like?
I think it's going to be more dynamic. First of all, I think that the boats are going to be, each boat is going to have its moment. I think that it's very difficult to, at least in this first edition, to converge to a solution that sort of everybody would be equally fast all the time. Some boats will be good in some conditions and some others in others. So I think that the level of the strategy and the navigation that the crews will do will take that into account.
Is that more to do with the foils than an ordinary boat? You sort of have to make the foils work for a limited range of speed and conditions. We're going to be faster at this angle, going to be faster at that angle, more so than some sails or some hull designs. Foils kind of force you there.
Well, foils force you to make choices, very specific choices. And so you cannot design a foil or a foil-assisted IMOCA to be with the same degree of hydrodynamic efficiency in 6 knots upwind and 30 knots downwind. Each sailing range, I mean, if you divide the spectrum of wind speed and wind angle into areas, each area would require a specific foil. So unless all the crews decide to basically put the eggs in the same basket, and all the designers have the same tools and the same dreams every night that they sleep, then the possibility of such a close convergence is very difficult. So they will be close, but I think boats would have their own little moments, and we see that today. Some 60s go well in some conditions and not so well in others, and vice versa. So that's what I meant. But also because of the speeds that these things are getting to, which is kind of scary, that would also make them have big deltas every now and again. So nowadays, in the 65 race, if somebody was 20 miles ahead of you, you will struggle to win that leg. Today, in an IMOCA, in a foiling IMOCA 60, 20 miles is, it's just a question of, maybe you in a couple of hours you gain it. So it's a different world, and it conditions the way the sailors will go about it.
And answer me this, because this is something this is the limit of. This was obviously the lesson that I skipped at university. I can do the force diagram for foils, foil assisted, all of that. I've got it. Then you take it down into the Southern Ocean. You take it through some big rough sea states. At what point, or is there a point, that the sailors are going to wish, you know what, I wish I didn't have these foils. This is too much.
Yeah, and what the question you just asked, at least myself, but I'm pretty certain that every other team and every other designer involved in the IMOCA design world right now we have the question. We haven't got the precise answer. We will know in this Vendée Globe. But if you analyze it from a very objective physical point of view, at the end of the day, you have a 60-foot piece that you need to fit within a system, a wave train system. And that wave train system hasn't changed. I mean, it's been like that for years. And we know that down there, the waves, they will travel between 23 and 25 knots, and that they will be so many meters apart, and they will be between 3 and 6 meter high. And in there, you need to fit a fuselage that has foils. Now, you say, okay, can you make it fly? Can you make a 60-foot fit in this system high enough to be above it? The answer is no. We know that already. Hardly Ultim, the Ultim hundreds or 105 footers, which the Ultims hardly fit in that event. So, the IMOCA 60s, they just don't fit. And of course, creating foils which make you fly that high, it's completely unrealistic because, the structural weight that you have to put on these things, it would defeat the purpose. So you end up in a very distant world between the, call it flat water sailing on IMOCA 60 and the sea state affected sailing. And it's completely different. To give you an idea, and this is, I knew that this was the case, I just didn't know to which extent it was the case. This is something I've been learning in the last few months. But to give you an idea, last time I sailed was a month ago with Arkea Paprec. We went out 300 miles offshore or something to come back downwind with the front. About 20 knots of wind, then it picked up a bit more. So we were VMGing downwind, and in one of the tacks, we were sort of oblique to the waves. We were comfortable on the waves, and in the other tack, we were kind of aligned in the waves. The boat configuration, the wind was the same, same wind direction, same wind speed, but the where you put the stacking, what you do with the reefs and the sails, and where you put the ballast in both those tacks were miles apart. I mean, way more than what I thought the differences were going to be. And that's just everything the same, except that there's the alignment of a wave train, which wasn't necessarily like the Southern Ocean. So yes, these boats will be extremely affected by the sea state. The more downwind that you go, the more that is the case. And we don't know, at least I don't know, and I would like to guess that no other designer or skipper involved in these new boats knows for certain to which extent this will be the case. But for sure it will be the case. And there's a lot of unknowns to that. And yes, I am pretty certain that even before they get to the Southern Ocean, a lot of them will be wishing that they didn't have the foils. Yes.
Right. I'm going to brush up. I'm going to find a sea state prediction model, because it sounds like the size and the orientation to the breeze of the sea state is something that's going to be critical.
More than the wind. So I'm prepared. I'm not an expert, but I'm happy to be wrong. But I'm prepared to. I'm prepared to bet to you that during the navigation of the next around the world race, ocean race, the wave files will be as important or more important than the weather files in the navigation. How do you call the prediction? Not the predictions. The computations. I think that waves impact the boat in terms of performance. You can have a performance of the boat impacted by anything between, for the same wind speed, anything between 5 and 7 knots of boat speed by the waves. Whether the wind speed, you would need probably as much wind speed different to create the same difference. So if I'll be navigating a new IMOCA 60, I'll be very, very keen to have as good, if not better, wave data from my competitor.
Right, that's fascinating, and that brings me on to a question that I wanted to ask you. That, like you say, all these simulations, the data, and from a design point of view, obviously back at our old university, Polytechnic back then, there was the old wave tank, the small tow tank down below in the cellar, and it was always fascinating.
Which we use for ABN AMRO.
Yeah. Okay, there we go. And I, as a student, I remember when we were told you can't come to the wave tank today, can't come to the tow tank, and you knew, that means Team Origin or someone's in there. So we'd peek through the windows and sort of try and get a little bit of a look. But you talk about this computational model, yes, for navigation, but obviously with design, it's gone so much the way of the computers. And in this latest iteration of the America's Cup, the sailors are virtually training with their goggles on, even in different countries. They're still able to sort of sail the boats. How important is it for you to still make a model, put it in a water, put it in a wind tank, or is it all just clicks of a button?
Well, no, the fact that in the digital world you can simulate things at the full scale, 1-to-1, makes it a lot, and the fact that computers are now so fast makes it a lot more interesting and precise to do it that way. But nonetheless, every now and again, you need to sort of set the zero scale. You need to sort of reference, because you could, with the digital world, you could sort of tangent yourself into oblivion if you want. So you need to put some benchmarks and references every now and again, and the tank and the wind tunnel are very useful for that. So it's still an interesting tool, but if you had to choose, by no means you would go to the tank nowadays. But the predictions are really tricky. I mean, the predictions on a fully flying boat, I mean, maybe what I'm going to say sounds weird, but are easier than in a boat such as the IMOCA that flirts with that transition. So, when you're simulating a fully flying boat, which basically depends on a mass, center of gravity, inertia spectrum, but also two tiny little foils that are basically creating all the hydrodynamic forces and moments. To simulate those forces and moments is quite easy, and it's actually, I'm not saying it's an easy task, but there's a lot of people in this planet that can do it properly. But the problem of the IMOCA 60, because they basically deal with that sort of transition where they're skimming and they're also flying, but they're flying in a non-equilibrated way. They don't have a flight control. So there's things you need to do in order to make them more stable than not. On the non-stable side, you have boats that do a lot of wheelies and, they just come up and down all the time. And then on the stable side, you have boats that take off and then they gently come from the transom down and they bounce on the transom, they come up again and they fly. You pray to God that they don't do the other way around and the bow goes down, because then that's a different story. But so you have to play with this transition of flows without a specific control, and where the inertial spectrum of the boat and the distribution of masses is very important. And that is extremely complex. I would even suggest, again, to the risk of being proven wrong, that the design of an IMOCA 60 right now is probably as complex or the most complex problem that a yacht designer can face, much more than a pure flying boat. So that makes it fascinating, because you're playing with the essence of all these phenomena, both hydrodynamic and aerodynamic. But you have an extra dimension, which is one that it wasn't that important in the past, which is the emotions, the dynamics, the inertial spectrum. And to give you an idea, when you're going sailing, when you're sailing these IMOCAs and you're going downwind and you sort of dependent on a wave spectrum and you want to have the bow very high on the water, you're trying to bring a lot of the mass of the boat further back on the boat, and you bring, you use the aft ballast and all that. But when you're flying, you're almost doing the opposite. Sometimes you actually, by separating the weights and having masses which are further apart from each other, you sort of provide a longitudinal stability by that inertia, which is what makes the boat fly better within a context of a piece that hasn't been designed to fly, because there's nobody has a joystick, and so that is very intrinsic of the IMOCA 60s, and some would say that it makes them old-fashioned and awkward for that purpose, because they say, well, if you're going to go fly, well, just use a joystick. But I find a lot of satisfaction in having to deal with that complexity of not having the joystick, if you know what I mean. Now, there's a few people, or there's some trends that basically say, let's just put these elevators in the rudders and let's put the joystick for the next race or whatever. And I have mixed feelings on that, because it's very easy to get excited about that, because the boats will be quicker and you'll be more often above the water. But I think that the levels of complexity to do that properly, and the software and autopilot that you need to develop, I am concerned about that, because I know that the team that will be able to develop that better, and we're talking about autopilots and electro-driven hydraulic systems, would win the race. Now, as sailors, particularly as round the world race, I think we want to prize something else. I don't think we want to prize the best electro-hydro engineers. They deserve the biggest prize. But I don't think the ocean race is about that. It's about seeing who can solve autopilots, flying systems, and flight control mechanisms better than others. I mean, there's another industry for that. And to a certain extent, you were talking about the America's Cup. I think that that's where the America's Cup might have gone a little bit too far. Do I look at these images that are coming out now from New Zealand and you go like, wow, amazing. Yes, I do. I mean, of course, the concept is brilliant. The concept is brilliant. It's extraordinary. Is it the best thing? Is it the best concept for the America's Cup? Well, maybe. I don't know. But I do know that you can do a yacht race, a very exciting and very good yacht race that prices the quality of sailors with something that doesn't fundamentally depend on an electro valve or a hydraulic system. I don't know if I kind of explained myself, but that's my view on.
It's fascinating, and it's a very, I know, everybody knows. There's a long debate about, in the America's Cup, should we have foils, should we not? Should we allow this system, should we not? And even in the ocean race, should we allow autopilots for the IMOCAs, should we not? Every edition, I'm sure, will get debated, and there'll be good steps and there'll be wrong steps. Finally, because I know you've been very kind with your time, and I don't want to keep you all evening, but it's wonderful. It's like being back at university and sort of, learning again for the first time. But for the next edition of the ocean race, or at least at the moment with the IMOCA fleet, you said that working on those boats is a challenge like none other. Are you getting the sort of satisfaction, the design satisfaction that you craved when you left university in 97?
Yeah, I do. No hesitation. And I would say that the design on the IMOCA 60s is probably the only, or one of the only games left in our sport that will provide you with that satisfaction. I'm pretty sure the guys in America's Cup are having a really good time. I'm very jealous not to be part of it this time. This is the first America's Cup I'm not part of. To complement the answer to your question, if the present IMOCA world would be pushed to dependence on electronics, hydraulics, and flight controls, such as it has been in the America's Cup, would that excite me as much? I don't think so. Because I think you lose quite a lot of the essence. And I think that the winning boat should be the one that has dealt with the aero-hydro forces on the one side and the skills of a crew in the other side the best. It's not about electrovalves and autopilots. I don't think so. It shouldn't be.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. Well, you've made your mark in the ocean races past. Like you say, you've also made your mark on the America's Cup. I await to see whether one of your boats is going to feature as strongly as it has done in the past in the next edition of the ocean race. Juan, thank you very much for talking to me tonight.
Thank you. It was very nice. Thank you very much.